Well, welcome everyone to the Spoken Gospel Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. We are continuing our walk through the book of Ezekiel. Last time we looked at the overall structure of the book. What is prophetic literature? Who was Ezekiel? What was his message about? What was going on? If you missed that episode, make sure to go back and listen to it. Today we're jumping into the first few chapters of Ezekiel, mainly looking at least what I'm hoping for, is what made this 30-year-old rabbi burst into flames when he read the word glory in Ezekiel.
Yes. The question we're all asking when we open up Ezekiel. To the uninitiated, there's a story in the rabbinic literature of a man who approached Ezekiel unworthily and read the word glory here in these opening chapters and then bursts into flames because the picture of God in these passages is so intense.
So my expectations are high, Seth.
High. If we don't burst into flames, we've done something. We're either... Wait, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
If we don't burst into flames.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I don't know. All I know is I don't want to burst into flames.
Got it.
Okay. All right. So frame up the discussion for us. What do we need to be talking about today?
Yeah. So as we move forward through the book of Ezekiel, I kind of want to attack it following the vision that we're about to see here.
Okay.
So Ezekiel is sitting on the bank of an irrigation canal, the Kibar Canal, and he sees the heavens opened, and he sees a vision of God. And later on, he'll say it's a vision of God's glory. And the best way that it's like glory is defining glory. It's like, I really like Bible Project's explanation. Actually, they talk about it. It's like a physical manifestation of the significance of God. So like, what would omnipotence look like? What would all knowledge look like?
Yeah.
What would all power feel like?
Yeah. When it walked into a room.
Oh,
man.
So that's what Ezekiel's going to see.
Yeah.
And he's going to see it in Babylon when he would have expected it in Israel.
In the temple. God's glory is in the temple.
Right. And so the story of Ezekiel really is like, how did God's presence get to Babylon? Why is it in Babylon? How did it get there? And how can it go back?
Yeah, okay.
And so there are really three major movements in the book of Ezekiel. The very opening chapters where God's presence shows up in Babylon. Then in chapter 8, we see God's presence leaving Jerusalem and all the reasons why he left. And then at the very end, in chapter 43, we see God's presence, his glory, his significance going back into the temple once again. And so the next three podcasts are going to follow that movement.
So we're going to follow God's movements.
That's right. Through the book of Ezekiel.
Okay. That's cool.
Yeah.
Great. So is this first vision, without cheating and looking at my Bible, is this the wheels and the eyes the stuff that everyone is very confused by?
That's right.
Okay. I should have started the episode with that because everybody wants to know what's going on there.
Well, yes. I think before we get to the wheels and the eyes and the animals with four different faces, we should just remember that we're reading prophetic literature, but we're also about to read a subset of prophetic literature, the prophetic commissioning ceremony.
Okay.
So throughout the Bible, when God chooses or commissions one of his spokesmen, he speaks to him, gives him a message, normally, often at least, shows up in some sort of physical manifestation and tells him that he is his prophet and then sends him out with the message.
Yeah.
So it happens throughout the Bible, right?
Right, yeah. Like Jeremiah, I chose you, I knew you from your mother's womb. Isaiah, you have the little fire coal.
Yes, he sees God's throne room and the coal touches his lips.
Okay.
You have Moses in the burning bush.
Right.
Where like he sees a physical manifestation of God, and then God tells him to go and declare freedom for his people.
I guess it makes sense to have this little bit of subgenre in a prophetic book. Yep. Otherwise, it's like, were you just always like this, hearing from God? You just wake up one morning or you just, I just hear from God all the time, and now I'm a crazy person named Ezekiel.
Nope. Yeah, this is a very specific event that happens in the life of God's prophets.
Yes.
Another interesting parallel to this story is actually Abraham. We don't really think about Abraham as a prophet, but in Genesis chapter 20, God calls Abraham a prophet. And if you think back to his story, it makes a little bit of sense, especially in light of Ezekiel. Abraham is living in Babylon. right after the Tower of Babel falls and all the people are scattered.
Right.
Ezekiel is in Babylon right after he has been scattered.
Yep.
God shows up to him and gives him a covenant with a covenant message that you will inherit the land. Part of Ezekiel's prophecy is that they will go back to the land. And in both cases, there is a sense in which Abraham is being promised a new creation, right? We had Adam and Eve fell, Tower of Babel fall, new phase of God's dealing with humankind.
Right.
A people, a new nation.
In a new land.
In a new land.
Eden's coming back.
Right. And Ezekiel's in a similar place. Jerusalem is on the verge of falling. And if something's going to happen, it's going to have to be totally new. And so Abraham is an interesting parallel to Ezekiel.
That is interesting, thinking about Ezekiel as a new Abraham.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
A new prophetic Abraham, ready to lead God's people into a new covenant era.
Yeah.
A new covenant era.
So what does Ezekiel's prophetic commencement ceremony?
Commissioning ceremony.
Oh, I was close.
Commissioning
Okay.
ceremony.
All right. What's his look like?
So what his looks like is the first thing he gets is a vision of God.
Okay, that's a good place to start.
And so we're just going to read it because this is the time to read Ezekiel. So in verse 1, I was among the exiles by the Kibar Canal.
Wait, sorry, where are we?
Chapter 1, verse 1.
Oh, okay.
In the 30th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day, I was among the exiles by the Kibar Canal, and the heavens opened, and I saw visions of God. And then just jump down with me to verse 4. And as I looked, behold, a stormy wind came out of the north, and a great cloud with brightness around it, and fire flashing forth continually. And in the midst of the fire, as it were, gleaming metal. And from the midst of it came the likeness of 4 living creatures. And this was their appearance. They had a human likeness, but each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and the soles of the feet were like the soles of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like burnished bronze. And under their wings on the 4 sides they had human hands, and the 4 had their faces and their wings like this. Their wings touched one another. Each one of them went straight forward without turning as they went. And so imagine like a being moving side to side without turning its body.
Omnidirectional.
Yes. Like the best picture I had was like UFOs. If you've ever seen like some modern like UFO takes, you have this ship that's like zooming and then just stops and then goes to the one side. And it's like very unnatural looking.
Unnatural. Okay.
Because it breaks all the laws of physics. As for the likeness of their faces, each had a human face. The 4 had the face of a lion on the right side. The 4 had the face of an ox on the left side. The 4 had the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you want to stop and talk about each one as we go? Or do you want to read all of it, be overwhelmed by all of it, and then talk about it in its wholeness?
I'm already overwhelmed.
Great.
And
as you should be.
I'm so confused at how this is a prophetic call.
Oh, yeah. This is just a vision. We don't even get to the call till chapter 2.
Oh, okay.
So it's kind of like with Moses, the burning bush. He just sees the burning bush.
This thing happens.
And he's caught up into this
vision,
this event.
Okay.
Or Jeremiah gets caught up into the throne room, and he's
Isaiah
gets caught up in the throne room. He's seeing something.
I see.
Before he's commissioned.
Okay.
So this is Ezekiel's version of that thing.
I see. This.
So let's pause. Let's slow down.
Okay.
What are we seeing?
I don't know.
Yeah. What are we seeing?
I have no idea. An omnidirectional mutant moving UFO.
Yeah.
What's
funny is that there's a weird amount of like scholarship about did Ezekiel see a UFO.
Oh, are you serious?
It's so weird. It's so weird. But it's like, people talk about it because it's so otherworldly. It's like even we have a hard time. What on earth are we seeing? And if you notice his language, it was like a human. It was like burnished bronze. He was like he's trying his hardest.
He's not saying it is. It was.
He's like my best approximation for what it was like.
Yeah.
Is like a human being with 4 faces and 4 wings that gleamed like metal.
Yeah.
Coming on a cloud full of fire. Like he's trying to keep up with a physical representation of God's omnipotence, omni-holiness,
Yeah.
omnidirectionality. He's like,
Totally.
he's trying.
I mean, we do the same thing. It's like Megan and I, my wife and I were driving down the road like a week or two ago, and this gorgeous sunset was coming down, and there was just like blue and pink, like tangled threads covering the whole horizon.
Yes.
And I was like, it's like cotton candy. It looked like cotton candy.
Right.
I was like, it's not. And if years later someone said David saw cotton candy in the sky, I'd be like, you misunderstand me.
I had no other words to describe the sunset
right.
than like artificially sweetened cotton candy. It was like cotton candy.
Or for our British listeners, candy floss.
Candy floss or fairy floss for our Australian
There we go.
listeners.
Okay, yes. So
so
he's approximating what he's seeing.
And the things that he's saying, though, the way that he's describing them written down, should also be familiar to us if we've read what happened on Mount Sinai, or if we've read the description of the mercy seat in Solomon's temple. So, for example, that's maybe overwhelming if we're not familiar with it, but
It's overwhelming because I am familiar with it, and I still don't know what you're talking about.
So in Exodus 18 and in Exodus 24, when God's presence falls and comes on top of Mount Sinai,
Yep.
we're told there's a whole bunch of wind.
Yep.
There's a whole bunch of fire. There's a whole bunch of smoke.
Yep.
There's a whole bunch of lightning.
Okay.
Right. Eventually, there'll be a whole bunch of sapphire in this vision, just like there was sapphire on Exodus's mountain.
Okay.
So it's overwhelming, yes, but it should be familiar.
Okay.
In the sense that it's like when God's presence shows up, when God Himself comes somewhere, there are these things: fire, smoke, wind, sapphire.
Yeah.
That's what I'm seeing
So
here.
what that is communicating is it was God.
It was God.
Okay.
It was God. Yeah. So I think when you're reading this, it's like he's trying to describe God in His
Yes.
power. And
Yeah.
It's like, and he's trying.
And you should feel overwhelmed because it is overwhelming, but
and
you
it
should
is
also go
God.
like, oh, this is like Sinai.
That's right.
It's like when God showed up on Mount Sinai.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. And then these creatures.
Yes.
So what are the creatures?
I don't know.
Why
are you asking me?
Let me just read. So I've described a lot of their features. Let me just describe a little bit more of their wings.
Oh, good. That was going to be really helpful.
That's
I
gonna
was
be
like,
really
I
helpful.
would have nailed this if you would have told me more about their wings.
Their wings were spread out above. Each creature had 2 wings.
Oh, I get it now.
Each of which touched the wing of the other, while 2 covered their bodies, and each went straight forward. Just meaning they moved without turning. They could go any direction without turning.
Okay.
So the reason I bring that up is there are other places in the Bible that describe the wings of beings that touch each other, namely on the mercy seat.
The cherubim.
The cherubim over the Ark of the Covenant spread out their wings and they touched each other. If you see the Raiders of the Lost Ark, they go like this.
Yes.
They touched each other. So what's this evoking? Oh, this is the most holy presence of God.
This is the throne of God.
This is the throne of God. We are in the center of God's power.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a problem.
Okay, continue.
What's God's throne doing out here?
Oh, yeah. We'll get there.
Oh, okay.
That is a great question. That is the question.
Oh, okay.
That is the question.
This is not where it belongs.
Right. The mercy seat's supposed to be
in the temple.
The Ark of the Covenant is supposed to be in the temple.
Totally.
Why on earth is it on the side of an irrigation ditch in Babylon?
That's very bad.
This is not where it's supposed to
All
be.
right.
Let's talk about the creatures a little bit more.
Okay.
Do you want to keep talking about the creatures?
I would love to.
There's a couple theories about the creatures.
Okay.
One is that Ezekiel, he's been living in Babylon for a little while now. He would have been familiar with the local deities. And so this is a amalgam of some of the local representations of their deities.
Oh.
And so what we're going to see in a second is that these beings are not itself the glory of God, but they carry the glory of God. So in a second, we're going to get this. It gets crazier. There's an expanse, a firmament.
Okay.
Like
stars?
Like stars. Or the separation
between stars?
Between the stars.
Yes.
The thing that we see when we look up at the sky will be resting on top of these 4 beings. And on top of that will be God himself.
So you have, okay, hold on.
Yes.
So you have an amalgamation of Babylonian gods.
Mm-hmm.
On top of them is space blackness.
Yes.
And then on top of that is Yahweh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I don't know if I'm helping you at all.
I could repeat it, but I don't know why we're talking about it.
One theory for why they are where they are
Uh-huh.
is to prove that they are under the power of God.
That makes sense.
They are the servants of God. They are, if they exist at all,
Yep.
they exist under God's power.
Which would make sense if we're talking about like, man, Babylon's destroying Israel. Their gods are conquering our gods.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
That's
like,
right.
and God's like, no, I ride on them like a chariot.
Yes, that's exactly. And think about, that's exactly right. So
Okay.
Babylon's going to invade Jerusalem, and Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, will say, "See, our gods are better."
Right. Our God beats your God. Checkmate.
And then God's going to say, "No, I was riding on top of your gods."
Yeah.
Yeah. I was the one behind all this.
Yes.
So
that makes a lot of sense.
the other way to think about them is as representations of the whole created order.
Oh, I see.
You have domesticated animals in the ox. You have wild animals. You have the birds, and you have humanity.
Yeah.
You have all of creation
Is under God.
is under God.
Both good news.
Both
Both appropriate for this moment.
Yeah. So again, what are we seeing? We are seeing God, a
Yep.
physical approximation of what omnipotence looks like, and all these are different aspects of that omnipotence that Ezekiel gets a glimpse of.
Okay. So you have Israel's God on the temple throne, reigning over all creation and other gods, going where he will.
Yeah.
Is that what
That-
the vision
Yeah.
is?
It keeps going.
Okay, but I'm
But you have
I'm
got
up to speed.
You're up to speed.
Okay.
And everything I think from now on is just color on that. It's additional details.
Okay.
It's additional information.
Okay. Cool.
So jump down to verse 15. Now, as I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the earth beside the living creatures, one for each of the four of them. And as for the appearance of the wheels and their construction, their appearance was like that of gleaming beryl, and beryl is just like a crystal, a clear crystal.
Oh, I thought a barrel was this big thing you put beer in. Different barrel?
A different barrel.
Oh, okay.
A different barrel. And the four wheels had the same likeness in the appearance and construction, being as it were a wheel within a wheel.
Oh, like spinners on rims of like lowrider cars.
Maybe.
No.
Maybe. Or I was imagining it like you have a wheel
Uh-huh.
this way and then a wheel inside that wheel rotated 90 degrees.
Isn't there like a Leonardo da Vinci drawing or something of that?
Yeah, probably.
Like a gyroscope. A gyroscope.
Gyroscope
is what I'm
That's
thinking
exactly
of.
right.
Yes.
You think of a gyroscope.
Okay, cool.
So they have these four beings have four gyroscopes next to them.
Okay.
And when they went in any of the four directions without turning as they went.
So that's how they're doing it. They're all riding on gyroscopes.
Yeah, they have these omnidirectional wheels that allow them to travel.
Oh my gosh. Dude, I remember. Do you remember when four-wheeled omnidirectional suitcases finally came out?
Oh, I do.
If you're a younger listener, you're like, this is all suitcases. But no.
That's what my kids bring to school.
Suitcases had little, like two of the little legs were just legs. And then the other two wheels were one directional.
Yeah.
And you could you couldn't turn it or anything. And now it's an
so-
omnidirectional four thing.
So smooth.
So smooth. That's what they're riding
that's
on.
what they're riding
They're
on.
riding on an
If you were
away
looking
luggage
for
suitcase.
if you were looking for a simpler analogy than a gyroscope,
Come on, man.
luggage wheels.
Luggage
wheels.
That's what's happening here. Okay, cool.
And then and this is verse 19. Verse 18. I'm so sorry. I missed a very important detail. And their rims were tall and awesome.
Tall and awesome.
Awesome. It's really funny how the tone with which you say awesome changes the meaning of the word.
It's awesome. Or it's awesome.
It's awesome.
It's true.
They were tall and awesome.
They were
man.
tall and awesome.
And the rims of all four were full of eyes all around.
Okay. Gyroscope covered in eyes.
Covered in eyes.
Okay. That would hurt the eyes as they rolled on the ground.
And when the living creatures went, the wheels went beside them. And when the living creatures rose from the earth, the wheels rose. And wherever the Spirit wanted them to go, they went. And the wheels rose along with them. And as for the spirit of the living creatures, it was in the wheels. And when those went, they went. And when they stood, these stood. And when they rose from the earth, the wheels rose along with them.
Okay.
So these four creatures are on top of gyroscopes, full of eyes, and they share a spirit, and that spirit drives them and moves them like the will of the being in the wheel is the same, and as the spirit moves, so do the beings.
Okay.
Yep. Questions.
Okay, I think I get the gyroscope.
Yeah.
You have this spirit. I'm guessing there's like the mega spirit is God, and he's directing the wheels.
Yes.
And the creatures and creation and subjugation to him, and he can move the nations, creation, his throne, whither he will.
Yes.
In any direction.
Yep.
And those wheels have eyes all over them, so he can see where he's going.
I think probably like maybe maybe, but or just like he sees everything.
Okay.
No matter where he goes,
Yeah.
he sees everything.
He's omniscient.
He's omniscient.
Okay.
He knows all. He sees all.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
He knows what's going on in Babylon. He knows what's going on in Assyria.
Yep.
He's hither and thither. He
That's
sees
right.
it.
Okay. So some people have described the vision that we've seen so far as a chariot.
Yeah, right.
So we got
What else do kings ride on?
right, but a thing with wheels with beasts attached to it.
Yeah, because they would often decorate chariots with the symbols of their gods and
Yeah.
animals and things like that. Okay.
That's right. So we're a very real, and this is if you read any scholarly dealings with this, they'll describe it as a chariot.
Okay.
We've read a description of a divine chariot.
Okay, that's helpful. Divine chariot.
And now we're going to read that on top of this chariot is the throne of God himself.
Okay.
It's a throne chariot.
Throne chariot.
Verse 22. Over the heads of the living creatures was there was the likeness of an expanse. This is the firmament, the space darkness.
Okay.
Shining like awe-inspiring crystal, spread out above their heads. And under the expanse, their wings were stretched out straight, one towards one another. So I'm just imagining like their four wings formed the perimeter around the space darkness, and it's a square of space darkness.
Whoa.
I don't. That's maybe a bad. But that's what my mind sees in this moment. And each creature had two wings covering its body.
Is a different way to say that like the perimeter of the angel wings? I shouldn't have said angels. The creature's wings are carrying the heavens with them.
Yeah, I think that is the implication.
Okay.
So if you thought about, if you've seen like are they called days when they're like a little carriage that people carry on poles.
Oh, I don't know.
It's like old school royalty. You have this like little carriage situation. Aladdin rides on one of them,
okay,
and then you have like 8 people under it with like
they're
carrying on a pole.
Right.
And the person rides along. I don't know what that's called.
I don't either.
A days?
I don't know. Kung Fu Panda, he rode on one after becoming the Dragon Warrior,
and
it was really heavy for all the little guys trying to carry him.
So imagining that, so it's like they're carrying
the firmament,
the heavens itself,
where God dwells.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Cool.
And when they went, I heard the sound of their wings, like the sound of many waters, like the sound of the Almighty, a sound of tumult, like the sound of an army. And that's all coded back to Sinai. Similar noises are heard on top of Mount Sinai.
So it's a traveling Sinai throne.
Yeah.
Okay.
And when they stood still, they let down their wings. And then there came a voice from above the expanse over their heads. And when they stood still, they let down their wings. And above the expanse over their heads, there was the likeness of a throne in appearance like sapphire, just like there was sapphire on top of Mount Sinai. And seated above the likeness of a throne was the likeness with a human appearance.
Not expecting that.
And upwards from what had the appearance of his waist, I saw, as it were, gleaming metal, like the appearance of fire, enclosed all around. And downward from what had the appearance of his waist, I saw, as it were, the appearance of fire. And there was brightness around him, like the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud on the day of rain.
A rainbow.
A rainbow. He's like,
there's a shorter word for that.
Yeah, there's a shorter word. There's a rainbow of light around him. So was the appearance of the brightness. Such was the appearance, the likeness of the glory of the Lord.
Oh, he defines it for us.
He defines it for us.
Okay, great.
And when I saw it, I fell on my face.
I mean, that makes sense.
And I heard the voice of the one speaking.
Whew. What an entrance.
What an entrance.
Taylor Swift's Era Tour has nothing on that entrance.
That was what I was waiting for.
That's an entrance.
That's an entrance.
Okay, so God shows up in a sapphire throne floating above space, surrounded by cherubim-esque creatures riding on the beasts and gods of the world, driven by his omnipotent, all-seeing spirit wheels.
Yep.
Clear as
Clear as
crystal.
The question we kept asking is like, why is this vision so intense? And I don't think there's a good answer to it necessarily, or maybe it's not the question the text wants us to ask, but it's like there's no other description of God like this in the Bible, save for Revelation 4,
Right.
which we could read. It's actually fascinating.
Very similar.
It's so similar.
Yeah.
And it's much shorter too, which is nice.
Yeah, but why is it so intense?
But why is it so intense, and why now?
Yeah.
Of
Well,
all
okay.
places.
So I mean, I have a thought,
Yeah.
but can we go back to my question yet of like,
Yes.
what is this doing out here?
Oh yes, let's go to there. Let's go there.
Because it's like we've been told where Ezekiel is. He's in Babylon, and we know where the throne of God is. There's a copy of it in the temple, where the actual glory of God reigns, is supposed to reign, and it's in the heavens of heavens.
Yeah.
That's the the real one. And now and sometimes in history, like on Sinai, heaven comes to earth.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now heaven has come to earth near Babylon,
Mm-hmm.
and all of the temple imagery is now out near Babylon. Like his throne is out here.
Yep.
What's it doing here
Yeah.
is like the weird thing.
So I think to answer that question, let's go back to what we talked about last week. What is the primary position of the people of God in exile and in Jerusalem? Ezekiel and Jeremiah have been sent to convince them that what they're doing is wrong, that their idolatry and injustice are wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And they keep responding to that by saying, no.
God's in the temple.
God's in the temple. God owns the land of Israel. God's presence is there. God's king is on the throne.
You can't touch us.
You can't touch us.
Yeah.
So for God's presence to show up in Babylon, I think the really basic thing it communicates to a people who are dead set on hearing nothing but their own privileged position with God is that God is not contained
Right.
to the temple they are so idolatrously attached to.
That's right.
Or presumptuously attached to it.
Right.
I should say. Their presumption is unfounded.
Right. They thought that God's throne in the Holy of Holies was cemented to the floor, but it actually sits on omnipotent wheels.
Yes.
And it can go wherever he wants. God's presence is not containable.
Yes.
Yeah. And
That's
it can
right.
go wherever it wants.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think that's a big part of what's happening here. The people, God's people, presumptuously believe that God's presence in the temple guarantees them exemption from judgment.
Mm-hmm.
It guarantees them exemption from exile or punishment, and that everything's going to work out fine for them because God's presence is where they expect it
That's
to
right.
be.
Yeah. Well, then it makes sense then why this is such a crazy vision, because there's so many questions that would come up. Like Ezekiel saying, no, it's really God out here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you think he's in there. Let me show you the real God of gods who reigns over the whole world
Yeah.
can go wherever he wants. He is out here.
The thing that you think was only on Mount Sinai and in the mercy seat is on the banks.
move.
Is on the move.
And he can go wherever he wants.
Mhm.
Like, and that's like, okay, so why the omnidirectional wheels? To prove that he can go wherever he wants. What about the beasts that he's reigning on, or the gods or all of creation?
Yeah.
Well, he can use Babylon or Israel however he wants. Like, it's the stacked images to prove
Yes.
to an obstinate audience
Yeah,
that the real God can do whatever he wants.
that's right.
Yeah.
I think that's all correct.
That's cool.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah, apocalyptic or prophetic literature, like when you read it the way it's supposed to be read, is really fascinating and like can communicate in a way that just saying God is God and he can go wherever he wants.
Right.
It
You
just
could
does,
say that.
You could say that, but it's like, yeah,
But you want to hear about eyes
it's like that just does something
on wheels
to you.
and wheels. You feel it emotionally,
You do.
viscerally.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So God has left the temple?
Yeah. I mean, or at least that's what this vision is. Or it's like he's not confined to the temple, right?
He can't. Yeah, he's not a slave that
Right.
can just be used
That
however you want.
When he gets this vision, we are 5 years away from the destruction of the temple.
Okay.
5 years away from Nebuchadnezzar's invasion and burning the city to the ground. And so in advance of that, we're seeing God moving away from it.
Mhm.
And we'll get some more, and we'll talk about this in a future podcast, but like, why is it leaving? Is there a reason for it? And we've hinted at it a number of times. It's the idolatry of God's people.
Right.
And Ezekiel will make that very explicit in coming chapters. So for now, it's just surprising that it's in Babylon. And I
Yes.
think to the point that we've been talking about, it's like, oh, you presume wrong. You presume wrongly.
Is the other thing that's happening here, like, because if I was in their position and I was enslaved in Babylon and I saw God riding out to me on a chariot throne, I would think, hooray, God's riding out to conquer my captors.
Yeah. So one interesting thing, it does say in chapter 1, verse 4, that I saw the stormy wind and it came out of the north on a great cloud. And so that might not sound like a ton of helpful information, but throughout Jeremiah's prophecy, he summarizes his prophecy as a boiling pot coming from the north.
Right, and that's Babylon, right?
And that's Babylon.
Yeah.
But at the very end of Jeremiah's prophecies, another army from the north comes and destroys Babylon itself.
There's always a bigger fish.
There's always a bigger fish, and in the prophetic literature, it always seems to come from the north.
Yes.
So there is, I think, it's hinting at the end of the book. I'm coming to judge Babylon. It hints at the end in which Babylon will be judged.
I
It's
see.
like, I'm leaving Israel as a judgment on your idolatry,
Mm-hmm.
but
I'm also writing to Babylon for its destruction as well.
that's right. That's
Okay.
right.
Cool.
I think that it hints at that fact.
Awesome.
I also think what this vision does, it prepares us for the horror of sin that we've talked about is one of the main focuses of Ezekiel. Like,
How so?
when you see God in the most vivid and visceral light you can imagine, I think you begin to see your sin a little bit differently. Like, my relationship to my speedometer gets really different when I see the cop car.
Yes,
right?
That's helpful. Okay.
And when I see God like this, what I think might deserve a pass, if it's only 5 miles over,
right,
becomes a lot more horrendous.
my heart starts beating really
My
fast.
heart-
I go 5
right.
miles under.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly
Keep my
right.
head down.
So I think there's a sense in which this vision prepares us for the intensity of language that Ezekiel's about to use to describe Israel's sin and Israel's idolatry.
The reason why the heights of the glory of God are showing up in such magnitude is because of the depths of depravity and sin that we're about to see, which such graphic definition.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's happening too.
Okay. Wow. Okay, one last thing
Mhm.
before we leave this vision.
Yeah.
If
Move
that's
on.
the plan.
Yeah. Move on to the commissioning ceremony.
I just want to get, I'm like, okay, hold on. Above the wheels and the animals and the firmament and the wings on the throne is a human?
The likeness of a human. That's right.
I'm like, Jesus?
I mean, I think let's micro hook that
Okay.
and keep going because the answer is yes.
Yeah.
And let's get to how it's Jesus.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, let's go to chapter 2.
Chapter 2.
Verse 1. And so this likeness of a human being said to me, Son of man, stand up on your feet and I will speak to you. So just let's pause. Son of man.
Mm-hmm.
Ben Adam is the Hebrew, Ben Adam. And it's a very unique phrase. Not a unique phrase in all scripture, but it's concentrated primarily here in Ezekiel. 92 times Ezekiel's called the Son of Man.
Oh, wow.
The Ben Adam. His actual name is only used twice in the entire book. Once in a couple verses, and then once when his wife dies. And it's a conversation for another day.
His poor wife.
His poor wife. But God's primary identification of Ezekiel is as the son of Adam.
Okay.
And I want to, or the son of man, son of Adam.
Yeah.
And I want to focus on that for a second, because it just should start ringing alarm bells for us. God's primary identification of Ezekiel is as one of the first king of the world, the first garden creature, the first image of God. Right. And so I think that's very intentional on God's part to refer to him as the son of Adam. We talked back in the first podcast about how there's this inevitability of a year of Jubilee,
a new creation.
And a new creation.
Yeah.
We talked about how Ezekiel is a lot like Abraham, on the verge of the people of God receiving a new covenant to enter into the land for the first time. It's a new creation's happening. And so I think it's supposed to clue us into the fact that the things that Ezekiel is going to say, he's a prophet of new creation. He's a son of Adam. the things he will speak about will bring about a new creation for God's people. Is that
it's making total sense. Yeah.
And then think about the images we've already seen in this divine throne chariot scene that should remind us of creation itself.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
We have God's Spirit hovering over the waters outside Babylon. There is light and color that just shows up on the scene first before anything else shows up. Light. God sits above the expanse or the firmament.
Right.
And those are the same words used in Genesis to describe
Crazy.
the division between the world and God's presence. As we've just been talking about, Ezekiel's called the Ben Adam. And then when the voice speaks right here, and he spoke to me, the Spirit entered me and set me on my feet, and I heard him speaking to me. That's exactly how Adam is created.
God breathed.
God breathes into him and raises him up off the ground.
Because the spirit, the ruach, is the same word, spirit, breath.
That's right.
Wow.
Yes. We've already said that the four creatures could be a symbol of like all of created order.
Yeah.
Like a symbol for all of created order. And in just a second, we'll learn that Ezekiel sits paralyzed for 7 days after seeing this whole thing.
Man, I don't blame him.
Yeah, I don't blame him either. So the thing I'm pointing out here is that God seems to understand, and Ezekiel seems to understand that this whole commissioning ceremony is laser focused on being a prophet of new creation.
Yeah.
Bringing a new jubilee for God's people, a new era for God's people after exile.
Well, yeah, and it's like what came before new creation? Wild and waste.
Wild and waste, chaos.
Like what opened there? The Spirit was hovering over the dark, and the chaotic, and the blackness.
Yes.
And it's like that is what's about to come in 5 years in Israel. The temple's going to be destroyed. Babylon's going to ruin everything.
Yeah.
And you'll have wild and waste. So you're going to need a prophet of new creation.
Yeah.
To show how the promises of God, despite the horrors of sin,
yes,
will continue into a new Eden.
That's right.
Okay.
That's exactly right.
That's very cool, man.
Yeah.
That's really awesome.
And the other Eden parallel is actually in chapter 3, verse 1. Son of Adam, eat whatever you find here. So this is exactly what God says to Adam and Eve in the garden. Like, eat whatever you see. And then he gives him a scroll. He says, eat this scroll and go and speak to the house of Israel. So I opened my mouth and he gave me the scroll to eat. And he said to me, Son of man, feed your belly with this scroll that I give you and fill your stomach with it. And then I ate it, and it was in my mouth as sweet as honey. So this scroll is the prophecies of new creation. Although, I mean, I'll say it differently. He says written on the scroll are prophecies of mourning and lamentation. It's a scroll of judgment.
Yeah.
And he's supposed to eat it, but it's a sweet taste to him. And the ending prophecies of Jeremiah are all about restoration. So I think there's a little bit of both happening there. As we'll get into the details, the heaviness of the sin, the mourning, and the lamentation is real. God's judging Israel's sin. However, there is a new creation implied in every inch of this opening commission.
So Ezekiel's commissioning is that of he sees the glory of God going wherever it wants, riding away from the temple into Babylon. And he's commissioned to be a prophet of new creation who will speak bitter words of mourning and lamentation about Israel's destruction, but the aftertaste of that prophecy will be sweet in new creation.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
That's chapters 1, 2, and 3.
That's chapters 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
So fun, right?
That's very cool.
We were kind of reeling after seeing all these new creation parallels. But back to your question.
Yes, because I was like, now I'm like, okay,
where's Jesus?
I want to talk about that.
I think the way we see Jesus in this passage of Scripture is by reading Jesus's commissioning ceremony.
Oh, okay. Would that be his baptism?
His baptism.
Okay.
So Luke 4, Matthew, Mark, John hints at it. And the way each of those stories of Jesus' baptism begins with the words, and the heavens opened. Interestingly, Ezekiel 1:1. I was on the Kibar Canal, and the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. The only place those verbs, that verb and that noun are placed together are in Matthew, Mark, and Luke when they describe Jesus' baptism, and Ezekiel 1:1.
That's crazy.
Isn't that crazy?
It seems like it would be such a common phrase because it's common to us. Because
It's common
of the
to us
gospel
because we
story.
read the gospel stories so often.
Yeah.
But Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and I think in particular Luke,
Mm.
is trying to clue us into the fact that what we're seeing here is the commissioning of a greater Ezekiel.
A new prophet of new
A
creation.
new prophet of new creation. That's
Oh.
exactly right.
The ultimate Ben Adam.
Where Luke also gives us this fascinating detail that no other gospel account does. He tells us that Jesus is about 30 years old. What's the first detail we learn of Ezekiel's prophecy?
30th year.
In the 30th year. Oh, how fascinating. John talks about someone who's coming who will baptize his people with the Holy Spirit and with fire. What is all around that first vision?
Spirit.
Spirit and flame.
Fire and flame.
Spirit and flame. And then when Jesus walks into the Jordan River, obviously the heavens open. And then what happens? A winged being comes on top of Jesus.
Something like a dove.
Something like a dove. And then a voice speaks from heaven.
Stop.
Just like it does in Ezekiel.
Crazy.
And then what does Luke do exactly after this moment? He gives Jesus' genealogy. And we're like, weird. Until it gets to the very end when it calls Jesus Ben Adam.
Oh my gosh.
Son of Adam, son of God. And then Jesus goes into the wilderness.
And he's told to eat something.
And he's told to eat something. Well, actually, Satan tempts him to eat with some bread. And he
Right.
responds with the phrase, man shall not live by bread alone, but every word
Right.
from God.
He's like, I'm not going to eat bread. I'm going to eat God's words, which is exactly what God tells Ezekiel to do right after he's commissioned. Stop.
That's exactly
What
right.
in the world?
And then when Jesus walks out of the desert, what's the first thing he does?
It gives a prophecy?
He picks up the scroll of Isaiah.
Oh,
And in
yes.
Luke 4,
Proclaims the year of Jubilee.
proclaims the freedom of the captives and the year of Jubilee.
This hurts.
Jesus
This is too much.
is the new Ezekiel. But more than that, it is God himself. Right?
Yeah. Yes.
I mean,
Yep.
I may
That's
have
right.
blown your mind.
Yep.
I just blew past Jesus, the new Ezekiel, but it's also the glory of God that overwhelmed Ezekiel into a coma
Yeah.
is the one walking with John the Baptist.
Yeah. I have to pick up my brain from the floor. Okay, hold on. So let me try this out. So you have this huge vision of God conquering all creation and riding on top of all other gods, knowing all, moving in all places, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. His throne chariot can go wherever it wants. He sits above the firmament, and all creation power is in his hands. And on his throne is one who looks like a human. And that human comes to earth as a real human, Jesus, and does the work that Ezekiel was called to do in a greater measure, which is to proclaim new creation after judgment.
That's exactly right. You did it all. You did the work.
What does that mean for us? Why is that? Why? It's extremely cool. Why is it good news?
Oh man.
What is this like? Why am I gonna stop recording this episode and then just want to worship because of this fact?
Yeah. I mean, Luke assumes that by coding his opening account of Jesus' ministry, that God's people are still in exile.
Yeah.
That there is a sense in which God's people are separated from their God, separated from their eternal home, and are living under some sort of presumption otherwise, or like idolatrously connected to their own efforts, to their own temple, to their own ethnicity, whatever. And Jesus comes on the scene and is repeating the same things that Ezekiel's doing to show that there's a new creation better than what's happening in the people of Israel's life in that time. But I mean, this might be a long way to answer your question, but it's like, I think the point is like, we're supposed to see ourselves as these exiles, right?
Yeah.
Luke,
Guilty of horrific sin, in desperate need of a jubilee of rescue and remittance.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like we like everybody in Jesus's narrative doesn't believe that Jesus has to die.
Right.
It's not the right way for the Messiah to go.
Yeah, we want the honey, not the mourning and lamentation.
Right. That's not God being faithful to his covenant if the Messiah dies.
That's right.
And Jesus comes on the scene and says, no, your sin is as bad as it is, and I will die for it. I'm going, this is me being covenantly faithful.
Just as destroying the temple in Ezekiel's day was me keeping covenant faithfulness to curse the evil.
Yep.
I will become the temple and be destroyed to curse the evil.
Yes.
And keep my covenant faithfulness.
So that we, all people who trust in me, get the new creation of God. Not because they deserve it and they're not horrifically sinful, but
Right.
because I've done all the work to make it happen.
I will take the kingdom of sin, bring it into wild and waste, take it back, strip it down, and build up a new kingdom of righteousness and goodness, a new Eden in the midst of your sin. And none of the horrific things you've done will keep me from doing it.
That's right.
Why? Because I'm the God who rides on the chariot, and I go where I want and do what I want, and what I want to do is love you to death and bring you to life.
What I want to do is be faithful to the covenant I said.
Yeah.
I will judge evil, not in you anymore, in me, and I will bring you to new creation by my power alone. Let's go.
Let's go.
Let's go.
That's awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
Is that the ground you wanted to cover today?
That's the ground I wanted to cover today.
Okay. Amazing. What's next for us in Ezekiel?
What's next for us in Ezekiel is we'll get into, we said we're going to follow the journey of God's throne chariot. So it's in Babylon.
Right.
Where we expect it to be in Israel.
Yes.
So why did it leave Israel? Why is it here? Why is it in Babylon?
Okay.
And so Jeremiah's going to answer that question for us.
I hope Ezekiel answers
Ezekiel answers that question for us. And we'll talk about his kind of prophecies of woe and lamentations next time. And then we'll get to talk about the promises of restoration and New Eden afterwards.
Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us on this episode of the Spoken Gospel Podcast. Please continue to walk through the book of Ezekiel with us. We're very excited to see what's next. So thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Spoken Gospel Podcast. Spoken Gospel creates short films, devotionals, and podcasts like this one. Everything we make is free because of generous supporters like you. To see our resources, visit spokengospel.com or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks for listening. See you next time.